Hi, everybody. I want to go over the answers to the exercise that I assigned for you that was due this morning. Hopefully, you all had a chance to do it. Um, if you have any questions about it, please make sure you leave comments here. I've been telling my other classes, I think the best thing is, unless it's a question that you really don't want your classmates to see, if you could leave it as a public comment on the Google Classroom instead of a private comment. That way everybody can see, and maybe several of you have the same questions, but you can see if it's already been asked and answered. So what I wanted to do was review relevant evidence. And as you may recall, relevant evidence was one of the first things we went over in the presentations. So just to remind you guys, I know we sort of got cut off in the middle of the presentations. We didn't even really get to finish them. So I do apologize to Dee and Sydney that didn't get a chance to do theirs. But just by way of reminder, guys, whether or not evidence is relevant is essentially the threshold for determining whether or not it's admitted. So anytime you look at a piece of evidence that you're looking to admit into court during a trial, the first question you have to ask is the evidence relevant? If the answer is no, if it doesn't fall under this Rule 401, tending to make a fact more or less probable, or it's of consequence in determining the action, then it is not admissible. We can stop our analysis right there. It's not admissible. If the evidence is relevant, then we go on to make sure that it doesn't fit into any other categories that would render it inadmissible. So let's say you have someone that has been beaten up and you've got pictures of the victim and their injuries. Okay. Would that be relevant? Yes, that would be relevant evidence. Showing the injuries that this person sustained in an attack would be relevant. Now, let's say that the prosecution wants to spend 2 days having the jury look at 600 pictures showing the victim from all different angles. Then we might say, okay, yes, those are relevant, but they are cumulative and they could cause undue prejudice against the defendant. So, what I'm trying to say is something has to be relevant to be admitted, but just because it's relevant doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be admissible. Something else, another rule of evidence, could keep it out. So, what I want to do here today is go through these and make sure that you guys got them all correct. And if you didn't, hopefully my explanation will show you why you may have missed one. Okay, so let's look at the first one, guys. Number one, we have someone who's on trial for murder, and the prosecutor wants to ask this person questions about whether or not they volunteered a local animal shelter because they think this will play upon the sympathies of the jury. Is this relevant? And it looks like most of you got this one correct. The answer is no. All right, showing that someone what likes cats or works at an animal shelter has no bearing on the issue of whether or not they committed murder. So if you hear this and you're a prosecutor and the defense attorney starts asking about cats and shelters, you can object and say it's irrelevant, and chances are your objection will be sustained, meaning the judge will agree with you and this line of questioning will have to stop. All right. So number one is no, it is not relevant. It doesn't have to do with the issue that's being tested, so the evidence will not be admitted. All right, number two, Alyssa. Alyssa steals a Halloween costume, all right, and her mother testifies that she refused to buy her one. Is this relevant? And the answer is yes. Why is this relevant? Well, it helps to establish that Alyssa had a motive to steal the costume. All right, it shows that she wanted a costume. Her mom refused to give her money, so it tends to make it more likely that she did steal the costume. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, that's not true because my mom tells me all the time that I can't have money for things. This isn't proving Alyssa stole the costume, all right? But this is evidence that shows it is more likely that she stole the costume, that she wanted a costume, that she was denied the ability to purchase one. Okay, so let's say that in the same case now we have a store manager that is going to testify that more Christmas decorations are stolen than merchandise for any other holiday. Is this relevant? And again, most of you got this one correct. The answer is no. Who cares? Who cares if Christmas merchandise is stolen? That has nothing to do with the fact that Alyssa stole a Halloween costume. So number three is irrelevant. Number four, we've got Susie charged with stealing a car. When the police officer come into her house, they find illegal drugs in plain view. And hopefully most of you remember from Law 1 that this is a good search. Under the Fourth Amendment, if they are properly executing a warrant, if they're properly executing an arrest and they see something in plain view, they can seize that evidence, okay? They want to ask her about the drugs found in her home at her trial for car theft. Now, the key here is they are asking her about the drugs at the trial for car theft. It doesn't say that they are bringing charges against her for the drugs. And they could have included that in one of the counts against her. They could have charged her with that, but they didn't. So in this case, that evidence under this fact pattern is irrelevant. Now, I did have some of you write, well, maybe the drugs were somehow related to the car theft or something like that. And that may be true. But under the facts I've given you, it doesn't say that. So we have to assume that it's not relevant. All right, Nathan. Nathan, I always knew you were trouble. Breaks into my classroom, steals copies of the answer key for Law 2. Prosecution calls one of his friends to the stand to testify that Nathan said his parents would ground him for a month if he didn't pass the law exam. Is this relevant? Now, again, we could run into some other issues here. We could say that this is hearsay. We could say that it's still admissible because it was a statement by a party. We're not worried about any of that right now. All we're trying to determine is whether or not this is relevant, and it is. Just like Alyssa's mom, who told her she couldn't have the Halloween costume, this goes to Nathan's motive. All right, Nathan had motive to steal the test because his mom told him he better pass that test. So by stealing the test, stealing the answer key, all right, it's showing that he had a motive to do it. All right, number 6, Joe is charged with drunk driving. At trial, the prosecution seeks to introduce he is part of a violent street gang, and everyone knows that people in street gangs play fast and loose with the rules. All right, is this relevant? No. It's not relevant. The fact that he's in a street gang, unless we could show something more specific, like the initiation for this particular street gang was to drink a bottle of rum and then drive across town or something like that. But without any other connection, just he's a bad seed because he's in a street gang, so he must have been drunk driving. All right, that's not going to be sufficient, so we can't do that. All right, and then the last one, I was inspired by my son. I've been helping my first grader do math every morning while answering emails from you guys. It's been quite a trip, and his math packets have a brain buster at the end. Actually, I realized yesterday it's actually a brain builder. So we're not trying to bust any brains here, but we're trying to build your brains. So we'll have to edit that for next year, I suppose. Okay, guys, a lot of you got this one right. I was really happy to see that. In other words, you have a breach of contract case and you get to pick one piece of evidence that's the most relevant. What are you going to pick? Guys, it's the contract. You're going to pick the actual copy of the contract. Okay? That's the most relevant piece of evidence. Here is the contract the parties entered into. Yes, what the parties have to say is certainly relevant, but the most relevant piece of evidence you could choose is the contract itself. Most of you did very well on these. It looks like most of you are getting it. If you're not, if you're struggling, if you still aren't sure why you missed something, if the explanation that I gave isn't sufficient, feel free to shoot me an email or ask me a question below. Otherwise, hopefully this clarified some points that maybe you guys misunderstood. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. Bye.